everyone, and let me welcome you to this month's edition of Real Talk with the Kansas Lawyers Assistance Program. Today, I have with us Monica Kurz of the Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters. So welcome, Monica. We're super excited to have you this month. I think first we'll start off by letting you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak with you and all of the members of your association. My name is Monica Kurz. I am with the Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters, or KSPHQ. Folks might remember us as Headquarters, Inc. We recently went through a corporate name change, but all of our services, the quality of that has absolutely stayed the same. So we do kind of a couple of different things, primarily focused in Kansas. So first, we have our counseling center, Headquarters Counseling Center, that answers the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that 800-273-8255 phone number for all 105 counties in Kansas. And we're actually the only center to do so in 104 of those counties. So we provide telephone-based crisis counseling for folks who are experiencing a suicide crisis or really any kind of emotional distress. We absolutely want to talk with folks before they get to that suicide crisis. You don't have to be having thoughts of suicide to call. And then we also provide help and counseling and kind of next step planning for folks who are concerned about someone. So we're a resource on the hotline in all of those ways. We also answer chat. So we do online emotional support through our counseling center. And then my program, the Kansas Suicide Prevention Resource Center, is really focused on bringing information, training, and awareness to communities, whether that's a professional community or a geographic community, to think about steps that they can take to be prepared to help someone who is in a suicide crisis and to really think through what some of those best practices are.
Well, let me say, on behalf of the Lawyers Assistance Program, I want to thank you for your work that you do in this area and the work that your organization does, because this is an extremely important topic, especially within the legal profession. I'll mention for our viewers, and you are probably aware, Monica, because you've done a number of things for us, but recent studies show, especially our 2016 study, that the Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs and the Betty Hazelton Ford Foundation showed that lawyers suffer from suicide at a significant higher amount than the general population, and so this is definitely a topic that's important for us and we want to bring awareness to. So I appreciate your work in this area, and especially for being with us today, especially because September is National Suicide Prevention Month. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what the goal is of this month?
Absolutely. So September is a month that is near and dear to my heart because it is an excuse that we have for an entire month to really raise awareness around suicide prevention. One of the things that I think is really true is that my job and the folks that I work with at our organization is to talk about suicide and suicide prevention all day, every day. So we are really accustomed to what I think is kind of a difficult topic for folks. I think that you hear the word suicide or you hear the word depression, you hear some mental health things. And for kind of lay people who aren't mental health professionals, it doesn't really feel like something that they're prepared to talk about, or it can feel like something that's really scary to talk about. And so in September, we can do some really important work on reducing that stigma. Right? We can talk about suicide as something that is preventable because we know that it is. If we are having open conversations about it, then we can prevent folks from taking their own lives. And so that's, I think, the stigma busting piece of September is a huge component of what every organization like mine is trying to do during this month. It's also a really great excuse for us to get good resources out there. So that folks know how to get help and who can maybe take it as an opportunity to start thinking about what part they might play in their personal or professional life around suicide prevention. So you mentioned that 2016 study, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I would say that lawyers in the legal profession are not kind of the only industry that are standing up and saying, hey, suicide and mental health is something that in my backyard, in my profession, we need to pay attention to. So another statistic, another piece of data that I would point your viewers to is we had a study come out in 2016 from the CDC, and they took a look at death data kind of going back 20 years, but they really drilled down into 2015 data. And they said, what do we know about circumstances that are surrounding suicide deaths? And one of the things that they came up with is that 54% of people did not have a known mental health condition at the time of their suicide death. And what that means, Danielle, is that they weren't seeing a therapist. They likely weren't talking to their primary care doctor about it. They certainly didn't have a psychiatrist who they were talking to. But my guess is that every single one of those people had a friend or a family member or a colleague or a pen pal. My guess is that they had some kind of connection with someone. And so I bring this up while we're talking about Suicide Prevention Month, because I think that it's a real opportunity to think about, how do I, as a layperson, how do I in my personal life think about being that first point of connection for those folks who aren't already connected to a mental health professional? And I think that's the real opportunity in September.
And that's a really good point that you mentioned, as far as educating people on this topic and what to be aware of, because you're completely correct. It is preventable. And so I would like to give our viewers some information, possibly about some warning signs. If maybe they see a colleague and they might have a concern, what are some things people should be looking for?
Absolutely. And I think that the warning signs are really important. I think that there are, I kind of divide warning signs up into like a couple of different categories. Those things that maybe more like indirect warning signs, something that's maybe not like flashing red lights that says suicide is a problem. And then we have some of those that are, I think, more direct warning signs. But I encourage folks to think about some of those indirect things. So one of the big things that we talk about are significant changes in behavior. And so this can look like, a lot of different things. I think about someone in my personal life who I recently just started having a conversation with because I noticed that they had lost some weight. And so I said, hey, is that something that you've been trying to do? Like, you look great, right? Like we're in a culture where weight loss is usually a positive thing, but like, is that something that you've been trying to do, or did that just happen? And they said, actually, I just haven't been as hungry. And that led us to a conversation about, some other things that are kind of off in this person's life, and opened up a door for us to start to talk about depression, for us to start to talk about suicide, for us to start to talk about what it would be like to get some help for that. So when I say behavior changes, I mean a lot of different behaviors. Eating is one, more or less, right? Weight gain or weight loss. Sleeping more or less. One of the big things that I talk about is the link between anxiety and suicidal ideation. That's pretty strong. And so anxiety can look a lot of different ways for folks. Maybe in the workplace, it's not getting tasks done. Like maybe I'm used to this person delivering in this amount of time and at this quality, and that's kind of fallen off. Or maybe I'm now getting emails from this person at 3 a.m, and that's pretty unusual. And so I'm looking for those kind of changes in behavior, but what I'm also looking for is that ability to kind of follow up and say, this is my business. I do want to talk about it. The other thing I encourage folks to think about is looking for people who are experiencing a loss or who are experiencing some kind of physical or emotional pain. Those are two things that we absolutely always want to follow up on, because they can be warning signs for suicide.
So let's say we have a lawyer out there that we might have a concern over because we're noticing some of these warning signs that you've spoken about. And let's say I'm the person who wants to approach that other lawyer, but I'm nervous about it. Can we talk a bit about that and what maybe that person who's nervous approaching the situation, how they can go about doing that to maybe even feel more comfortable with having the conversation with somebody?
Yeah, the first thing that I want to say to you is that you do not have to solve this crisis by yourself. Like you are not, like if you decide to approach this person, you are not responsible for doing everything by yourself. Your job is to open the door and to get us an opportunity to get that person some help. So one of the things that we really talk with folks about is how can you be specific about what you're noticing? And how can you be specific in a non-judgmental way? Because a lot of what we're asking folks to do here is to maybe have some conversations that normally, if we thought about having them, our initial reaction would be, well, that's not any of my business.
Right.
That's not any of my business. And I get it, right? Like, I think typically we don't consider it as a part of our professional duty to talk about uncomfortable things in somebody's life. And so if we notice that someone's, say, drinking more, well, that's not any of my business. But the thing that I would encourage folks to think about is whose business is it going to be? And is it better to have an uncomfortable conversation? Or is it better to not have that uncomfortable conversation and then feel regret about that later? So I would say kind of the first hurdle is decide that it's okay for this to be my business. And if I truly don't think that I'm the person, then who is? Because if it's not me, then one thing that I can do is I can bring it to somebody else's attention who maybe could have that conversation. And that's also totally appropriate. And then if you are the person to have that conversation, how do you say, hey, Danielle, I've noticed that since you went through that breakup, that you just don't seem like yourself. It seems like maybe you're not sleeping as well. Could we maybe talk about that? So what I'm doing there is I'm telling the person why I want to talk. And I'm also signaling, hey, this is something that I think is okay for us to talk about. I'm doing this in a really non-judgmental way. And once we start that conversation, I encourage folks to really be brave and ask about suicide directly. Sometimes folks who are going through what you're going through are thinking about suicide. Are you? That's an entirely safe question to ask.
Mm-hmm. Why do we want to ask directly when we're talking about suicide?
Sure. I mean, I think that's a great question. I think we get it a lot. And I mean, I think if you think about it, if you were thinking about suicide, given what we know about the stigma around that topic and just stigma around mental health in general, would it be easy for you to say, hey, I'm thinking about suicide. Can you talk to me about it? And I think if your listeners are really honest with themselves, they would say, nope, that is not something I would feel comfortable saying. And so what we do by asking directly is we open up and say, yep, I'm safe. This is something I want to talk about. I'm not going to shut you down if you bring it up. And so we signal that. It also lets us know what we're talking about, right? And I think that that's really important because I'm probably going to handle a conversation about suicide different than I'm going to handle a conversation about like just needing to take some time off, right? And so I want to know what we're dealing with because then we can deal with it together.
So if somebody does approach an individual and opens the door and is very direct about that question, and the answer is, yes, I have been contemplating suicide, what are the next steps in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would first caution folks, if you find yourself having a conversation about suicide, until we know some more about what's going on, it's really important to stay in contact with that person. If you're on the phone or via text, right? Like to keep that connection going. If you're in person, not leaving that person alone until we know some more about what's going on. And then it can be really helpful to think about how to keep that person safe in the immediate moment. So one way that we'll respond is, thank you. Thank you for trusting me with that information. That had to be really hard. I need to ask a couple more questions just so I know what I need to do right now. That first question is, have you already done something? You know, we deal with this a lot on the phone. When you don't have the benefit of visual information, it can be really tough to know whether or not somebody's safe. So we want to know, have you already done something? And if the answer is no to that, have you thought about what you would do, right? We want to find out how prepared somebody is. Because if it's just like some kind of vague thoughts that I've been having, that's kind of one response. And if it's, no, I've already made some pretty serious preparations, then we know that we maybe need to act a lot more quickly. So it's useful to have the answer to those two questions. If someone's already done something to take their own life, get them help immediately. Call 911, get medical attention. If they have not, then the conversation that we're having is, can you tell me a little bit about what brought you to this point? Because we find that listening in a really non-judgmental way allows folks to release some of that pain that they're normally carrying by themselves. And once they've released some of that pain, they're usually a lot more willing to get connected to longer term help. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. That does. So when we're having these conversations and we get to that point in the conversation where we can make a determination, is this an immediate emergency where I need to call 911, or is this something that this person might need more long-term help? If we're kind of in that area, what should I do, since how, I might be the lawyer that doesn't feel like I'm trained to help this person? What should kind of be in the back of my mind to where I can maybe direct this person?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. First, always feel free to call our organization. No matter where you are in the country, if you dial 800-273-8255, you will be connected to a trained counselor who can help you walk through next steps. That is absolutely always an option. The other thing that I would point folks to is the local community mental health center in your area. In Kansas, there is one serving every county in Kansas. And so you can find those by Googling the Association of Community Mental Health Centers. SAMHSA also has a treatment finder tool. So you can go to findtreatment.samhsa.gov, plug in what you're looking for, and it will give you some options. So really getting scheduled with a mental health professional, I think, is really, really helpful. If that's a step that folks aren't willing to take quite yet, then I think it's important to think about who they will follow up with. Will they follow up with you? Will they talk to a spouse or a partner about what's going on? Will they talk to a mentor or a sponsor about what's going on? But who else can we bring in? Like gold standard mental health professional. Can't do that, then who else can we get on board here? Because we want to spread out the safety net that we have. We want to make that as big as possible. We never want to be the only one who knows about someone's suicidal thoughts.
Right. I think that's a great point, Monica. And I also want to remind our viewers that if this person is another lawyer or a judge, somebody within the legal community, then obviously the Kansas Lawyers Assistance Program is also a resource, as well as the Judges Assistance Committee, if this person happens to maybe be somebody that's on the bench that you are having that conversation with. But I completely agree, getting the person connected to other means and other healthcare professionals who may be trained and can provide services for the individual who may be struggling is definitely something you want to do in that instance. So let's say I'm a viewer and I'm watching today and I want to learn more about this so I'm better prepared if I'm faced with a circumstance such as this that we're talking about today. Are there any resources or any training that's available out there you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would encourage folks to visit the website for my organization, which is kansassuicideprevention.org. And if you click on the warning signs, safety planning link on that website, it'll take you to more information about safety planning with someone who's at risk of suicide, more information about warning signs and risk factors. I would also point folks to the Be the One To, BETHE1TO.org. And so that takes folks through kind of a simple 5 steps that they can take during National Suicide Prevention Month or any time of year to think about how to be better prepared. So I would point folks to those 2 in particular. If you are looking to learn more about safety planning, I'd encourage you to download the My3 app on your cell phone. Take a look at what's involved in a good safety plan, because that's something that I think that we can model for our colleagues, for our kids, for our community, about how to take steps when we are a healthy person To say, I know that anyone can go into crisis at any time doesn't make you a bad person, but it does help to be prepared. And one of the ways I can do that is by having this app on my phone.
And we'll be sure to post some of these resources on the Kansas Lawyers Assistance website, so that way you guys can have these links to some of this information that Monica is pointing to. I know last week we pointed folks to the Be the One To. It's great resources out there, so I'm glad that you mentioned that one as well. But we'll be sure to get our viewers the additional information too, and we appreciate that. One other thing I think I want to get into a bit, Monica, is if we have any viewers who might say to themselves, I'm feeling like I'm in crisis, or I'm feeling like I need to talk with somebody, what resources are out there for maybe an individual person?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to point you to that hotline, that 800-273-8255. If you are a person with an LGBTQIA plus identity, I'm going to point you at the Trevor Project hotline. So that phone number is 866-488-7386. There are also web chats available through both of those organizations. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out to one of the crisis organizations. What I want you to hear is that that does not mean that we want to call the police. That does not mean that we want to send you to the hospital. That does not mean that we want to broadcast what's happening with you in a way that's going to make you uncomfortable. But I think it's really dangerous to have those thoughts alone. And one of those crisis points is a really great way to start talking about what can happen next. I think often we hear from folks that maybe they had some hesitation calling a crisis line, like these are strangers, right? Like, why do I want to talk to this person? And what we hear time and time again from folks who reach out to these resources is that what they learn is that they're staffed by people whose sole desire is to connect with someone who is not connecting with anyone, and that they truly care for the folks who are on the other end of the line. I started answering the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in 2005. I started doing that as a 20-year-old, just because it was an opportunity that I had, and I learned that that I had a real heart for being on that phone. And I think that that's what you find kind of across organizations. So I just really want folks to feel like that's a safe place that they can call, and that it's really staffed oftentimes by folks who are not paid to be there. Really all of those lines rely in some way on volunteers. So we want to talk with you. We want to help you get to that next step. If it's too scary to talk to someone that you know, then call us.
You mentioned that a lot of those lines are run by volunteers. I'm curious to know if somebody is interested in volunteering, where would I go for that? How would I get involved if I maybe want to spread more awareness about suicide prevention?
Absolutely. I would encourage folks to visit my organization's homepage, which is kspHQ.org. We have a link there. If you're interested in volunteering, you can fill out a form and we'll contact you when our next training group is up and running. The National Crisis Text Line is also a volunteer organization. So you would again go to crisistextline.org and let them know that you're interested in volunteering. The same with the Trevor Project. And all of those folks, including us, we have an extensive training program. We are not going to turn you loose until we're sure that you know what you need to be able to do. Because we do find that it is the most important thing that folks have a desire to do this work, and then we can teach you everything else that you need to know. So we actually just started a training group 2 weeks ago, and we will have another one that gets going in the spring. So we're always in need of folks. Absolutely.
Great, good deal. Well, I'm glad I asked that question then, because I'm sure some people might be interested in learning how to get involved. Is there anything else that you think is important that maybe we should mention with respect to suicide prevention? Since I have you here today, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want, I think this is an important topic. And so I want to make sure that we kind of cover the bases here for our viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing that I can drive home is that suicide is preventable, and it is preventable by everyday people. And the way that we do that is by really noticing the people around us, slowing down to take the time to engage with folks, being good advocates for increased access to healthcare, stable housing, some of those like really basic health equity issues, that all of that goes a long way to preventing suicide, and we all have a part to play in that. And that if you want to be a part of that fight, there are organizations out there that can help you do that. But that this doesn't have to be scary, that we can prepare you, or we can connect you with folks who can help you do that work. But if your viewers take away one thing, which is I can notice the people around me and I can start a conversation with them, then I would say that that's more than I can ask for. That would be incredible.
All right, folks. Well, you heard Monica say it. It is preventable, and we all have a role to play in it. And so I would encourage all of you to visit the websites that she has mentioned today, so that way you can learn more about this important topic. And that way, hopefully, we can also begin to have conversations with one another, say the word suicide to each other, and hopefully continue to work on reducing that stigma associated with suicide. So I mentioned we would post all of this information on our website. So please, our viewers out there, please visit our website. Please visit our social media pages. Please visit the Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters website and all of their lovely resources.
We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. Find us. Yeah.
Exactly. Go to it, get more information. And should you wish to have further conversation with the Kansas Lawyers Assistance Program about this particular topic, or want to find ways to volunteer and get involved, please feel free to contact us as well. All right, everybody, that is September's edition of Real Talk with KALAP. So like I said, just visit our social media pages to get more information about this important topic. Thank you.